Hello, I am Mike.
And hello, I am Lily, and welcome to English Podcast Flow.
Today we're tackling a topic that I think a lot of our listeners will connect with, how to memorize new English words effectively, and most importantly, how to make them stick in your brain for good.
Yeah.
We've all been there, right? You spend all this time learning a bunch of new words, you feel good about yourself, and then like a week later, they're just gone.
It's a very, very common struggle. And it's not because you aren't trying hard enough. Studies show our brains prioritize information we use frequently. If you're not actively using those new words, they kind of fade away.
Yeah, like that book on your shelf that you keep meaning to read,
Exactly.
but never get around to.
Yeah.
So if simply reading a word list isn't the most effective strategy, what can we do to make those words stick? What's the secret sauce?
Well, the key is to shift from passive learning to active engagement. So instead of just letting those words wash over, you really kind of wrestle with them and play with them and make them your own. And the good news is there are some really fun and effective ways to do that.
All right, I'm all ears. Give me some concrete examples of how we can move from passive reading to active use.
One of the simplest things you can do is to use the new word in a sentence. And not just write it down, but actually say it out loud. The act of verbalizing that word helps to solidify it in your memory. Even better, try to incorporate that word into a conversation with a friend or a family member.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah.
So it's all about making it feel relevant. And speaking of making things memorable, I've always found that visuals can be super helpful for learning new vocabulary.
Absolutely. Studies show that our brains are wired for visual processing. Like, we tend to remember images much more easily than just abstract concepts. Like, think about it. If I say the word apple, what pops into your head? Most likely it's not the letters A-P-P-L-E.
It's the apple.
It's that image of a juicy red apple.
Right. So how can we harness this visual power when it comes to learning new English words?
Flashcards are a classic for a reason. But instead of just having the word on one side and the definition on the other, try adding a picture to that flashcard. So for example, if you're learning the word mountain, you could have a picture of a beautiful mountain range on one side and the word mountain on the other. And having that visual connection really creates a stronger association in your brain.
That's a great tip. It's something you could easily do with physical flashcards or even like digital flashcard apps. Now, another thing I've heard about is this idea of learning words in groups or in clusters. Can you tell us more about that?
It appears that our brains love to make connections, and by grouping those words together, we can actually remember them better. Instead of learning cat in isolation, you could learn it alongside related words like dog, pet, fur, tail, and so on.
So you're creating this network of interconnected words that all relate to that central theme or concept.
Exactly. And by building these networks, you're essentially creating this contextual framework, which makes it easier to recall individual words. Like if you're trying to remember the word cat, but you've also learned dog and pet, those other words can serve as cues to help you retrieve cat.
It's like having a built-in support system for your vocabulary.
Yeah.
So we've talked about active use, visual learning, and grouping related words together. What else can we do to make those new words stick?
One word: repetition. It's the cornerstone of language learning, and it's really the key to moving those words from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. How did you learn your native language? Through constant repetition and exposure, right? You heard the same words and phrases over and over again.
That's so true, but repetition doesn't have to be boring.
Absolutely not. There are so many different ways to make it fun and engaging. You can use those flashcards we mentioned, but you could also try writing the word down several times or reading it out loud to yourself. Even try creating some silly sentences or stories using the new word. The more you interact with it in different ways, the more likely it is to stick.
Yeah, I love that idea. So are there any other strategies we can use to make those new words stick?
One technique I find particularly helpful is to create a humorous or memorable association with the new word. You know, our brains really latch on to things that are funny or strange or unexpected. If you can connect that word to a silly image or a funny story or even a personal memory, it will stay with you.
Okay, can you give us an example of how that might work?
Sure. Let's say you're trying to learn the word enormous.
Okay.
Instead of just memorizing that definition, you might picture an enormous elephant balancing on a tiny little ball, or imagine yourself shrunk down to the size of an ant and you're surrounded by enormous blades of grass. The more vivid and ridiculous the image, the better.
That's hilarious, and I can see how that would stick in your mind.
Exactly. And the great thing is you can get as creative as you want. You can draw pictures, you can write stories, you can even act out scenes to help cement those associations in your memory.
All great advice. Now, I'm curious. A lot of our listeners struggle with this feeling of being overwhelmed by the number of words out there. It can feel impossible to know where to start. Do you have any advice for managing that feeling of overwhelm?
It's a great question, and it's something that so many language learners experience. But the key is to remember, you don't need to learn every word in the dictionary overnight. Focus on the words that are most relevant to your interests and goals. For example, if you're learning English for travel, you might prioritize words related to transportation or directions or accommodations or ordering food.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's about being strategic.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to break down your learning into smaller, more manageable chunks. So instead of trying to learn 50 new words at once, focus on 5 or 10 at a time. You can even create thematic lists based on your interests or goals, like words for describing food, or words for talking about music, or words for expressing your feelings.
And celebrate those small victories. Every new word you learn is a step closer to fluency.
Absolutely. And remember, language learning is a journey, not a race. It's all about enjoying the process of discovery, exploration, and growth.
Yeah, I love that perspective. It's a reminder that language learning is about so much more than just memorizing words. It's about connecting with new cultures and expanding our worldview and just becoming more confident communicators.
Beautifully said. And with that, I think we're ready to move on to our next topic, which is all about harnessing the power of music for language learning.
Okay, get ready to turn up the volume because we're about to explore how music can be an incredibly fun and effective tool for mastering English vocabulary.
It's an area of study that's yielding some truly fascinating insights.
I'm excited to dive in. Now, you might be thinking, how can listening to music help me learn English? Well, get ready to be surprised. Studies show music can actually stimulate different areas of the brain, including those involved in language processing and memory.
It's like a workout for your brain, but with a much better soundtrack. One of the key benefits is that it helps us with pronunciation. When we listen to music, we're exposed to the natural rhythm and intonation of the language. So we hear how native speakers pronounce words and phrases, and we unconsciously start to mimic those sounds.
So it's like our brains are absorbing those patterns without us even realizing it.
It is, and this is especially helpful for learning languages that have sounds that are different from our native language. Music can help train our mouths and our tongues to produce those unfamiliar sounds more naturally.
I can definitely relate to that. I remember when I was learning Spanish, listening to music really helped me get a feel for that rolling R sound.
It's a common experience. Music can be a fantastic tool for fine-tuning those tricky pronunciation details.
Now, I'm also curious about how music can help with vocabulary acquisition. Can simply listening to songs really boost our vocabulary?
Absolutely. Think about it. Songs are essentially stories set to music. They often tell a narrative, they express emotions, they use vivid imagery, and all of that can help us remember the words more easily. For example, if you're listening to a song about heartbreak, you're likely to encounter words related to sadness or loss or longing. And because those words are embedded in this catchy tune, they're much more likely to stick in our minds.
Yeah, the music adds an emotional layer that makes the words more meaningful and more memorable. It's like the melody and the rhythm act as a kind of mnemonic device.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual words. Music can also help us with grammar and sentence structure. Songs often use repetitive phrases and grammatical structures, which can help us internalize those patterns.
It's like getting a grammar lesson disguised as a catchy tune.
Precisely. And because the music is engaging and enjoyable, we're more likely to pay attention to the language and absorb those grammatical structures without even realizing that we're learning.
I love that. So when it comes to choosing music for language learning, are there any specific genres or artists that you recommend?
It really depends on personal preference. The most important thing is to choose music that you genuinely enjoy and that you connect with emotionally. But it's often helpful to start with songs that are relatively slow and clear and gradually work your way up to faster, more complex songs as your listening skills improve.
So I might start with some folk music or ballads and then gradually move on to like pop music or hip hop.
Exactly. And it's helpful to look up the lyrics beforehand so that you can follow along and identify any new words or phrases. You could even create your own little vocabulary lists based on the songs that you're listening to.
And you can sing along too, right?
Yes.
Even if you don't know all the words, it's a fun, active way to practice pronunciation and just get a feel for the rhythm of the language.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Remember, everyone sounds a little silly when they're first learning to sing in a new language. It's all part of the process.
Yeah, this is all such great advice. I feel like I have a whole new appreciation for the power of music and language learning. It's not just entertainment, it's this valuable tool that we can use to improve our pronunciation, our vocabulary, even our grammar.
Exactly. And the best part is it's enjoyable and accessible to everyone.
So if you're looking for a fun and effective way to boost your English skills, turn on some music and let the learning begin. Now, before we move on to our next topic, which is all about finding and working with a language partner, we'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yes. What are some of your favorite songs for learning English?
Share your recommendations in the comments below. We can't wait to see what you come up with. Okay, folks, now let's delve into the world of language partners and discover how connecting with another learner can take your English fluency to the next level. It's one of the most effective ways to develop confidence and fluency in speaking.
Absolutely. For those who might not be familiar with the concept, a language partner is simply someone who speaks the language you're learning and is willing to practice with you. It could be a native speaker or someone who's already fluent in the language.
So it's like having a built-in conversation buddy who can help you practice your English skills in a more real-world setting.
Exactly. And they're so valuable because they provide that opportunity for real-life conversation practice, which is essential for developing fluency and confidence.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the goal of language learning is to be able to communicate with others. And there's no better way to develop those communication skills than by practicing with someone who can give you feedback, who can correct your mistakes and help you expand your vocabulary.
It's like having a personalized language tutor who's also a friend.
Exactly. And the best part is that language exchange is a two-way street. So while you're practicing your English, you can also help your partner practice their native language.
It's a win-win situation. Now, I know a lot of people might be a little intimidated by the idea of finding a language partner. Where do you even start?
There are actually a lot of great resources available these days. One of the easiest ways is to join a language exchange website or app. There are some fantastic platforms out there that connect people from all over the world who are learning different languages.
So I could potentially find someone who's learning English and is also interested in learning my native language.
Exactly. And most of these platforms have features that allow you to filter your searches based on your interests, your language level, and even your location.
Oh, that's so helpful.
Yeah.
It just makes it much easier to find a compatible language partner, someone who shares your interests and learning goals.
Precisely. And these platforms often have built-in messaging systems or video chat features, so you can connect with your partner online no matter where they are in the world.
That's fantastic. It opens up so many possibilities. Now, once you've found a potential language partner, how do you know if they're a good fit? What should you look for?
That's a great question. It's important to find someone who's at a similar language level as you, who shares your interests and who's committed to that regular practice. So if you're both beginners, you can kind of learn and grow together. And if you have some shared interests, it's going to make your conversations more engaging and more enjoyable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's about finding someone you can connect with on a personal level as well as a linguistic level. And consistency is key, right?
Absolutely. If you're both serious about improving your language skills, you'll be more likely to stick with it and make progress together.
Now, once you've found a compatible language partner, what are some tips for making the most of your language exchange sessions?
One of the most important things is to schedule those regular practice sessions and stick to them as much as possible. So whether you meet once a week, twice a week, or even more often, the key is to make it a regular part of your routine.
And how do you structure those practice sessions? Do you just chat freely, or is it helpful to have a bit more structure?
It can be helpful to have a little bit of structure, especially when you're first starting out. You might decide to spend half the time speaking in English and then half the time speaking in your partner's native language. This gives you both an opportunity to practice your target language and get feedback from a native speaker.
That's a great idea. It's a fair and balanced way to approach the language exchange. Are there any other tips for making those sessions more effective, more engaging?
Absolutely. One strategy is to try to incorporate some activities into your practice sessions. For example, you could watch a short video together, or you could read an article, or you could play a game.
I love those ideas. It keeps things interesting and it helps you practice different language skills like listening, reading, and speaking.
Exactly. And it also creates opportunities for more natural conversation and vocabulary expansion.
Now, I know some people might feel nervous about speaking in a new language with a stranger. Do you have any advice for overcoming those nerves?
It's completely normal to feel a little self-conscious at first. The important thing to remember is that your partner is also learning, so they're likely to be understanding and supportive.
And everybody makes mistakes. It's all part of the learning process.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
This is all such great advice. It's making me feel a lot more excited about the prospect of finding and working with a language partner.
I think it's a wonderful way to enhance your language learning journey.
Now, before we move on to our next topic, which is all about embracing mistakes as part of the learning process, we'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yes, we're curious. Do any of you have experience working with language partners?
What tips do you have for finding and connecting with a compatible language buddy?
Share your experiences and your insights in the comments below.
Okay, folks, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that's often seen as a negative in language learning, but we're going to reframe as a positive: making mistakes.
It's time to embrace those mistakes and see them as valuable learning opportunities.
I'm ready for this mindset shift. Tell us, why are mistakes so important in language learning?
It appears that our brains actually learn more from our mistakes than from our successes. When we make a mistake, it triggers a process in our brains called error-based learning, which helps us remember the correct information more effectively.
So it's not about avoiding mistakes at all costs. It's about using them to our advantage.
Exactly. Each mistake is a chance to identify an area where we need to improve. It's a chance to practice the correct way of saying or writing something. So the next time you make a mistake, don't beat yourself up about it. Instead, take a deep breath, acknowledge the mistake, and try again.
It's all about turning those oops moments into those aha moments.
Precisely. And remember, everyone makes mistakes. It's a natural part of the learning process. Even native speakers make mistakes sometimes.
That's reassuring to hear. So instead of viewing mistakes as failures, we need to see them as stepping stones on the path to fluency.
Absolutely. The more comfortable we are with making mistakes, the more fluent and confident we'll become, because we won't be so afraid of saying the wrong thing.
That makes sense. We'll be more willing to experiment with the language and take risks, which ultimately leads to greater progress.
Now, that doesn't mean that we should just throw grammar rules out the window. It's still important to learn the rules of the language and strive for accuracy, but we shouldn't let the fear of making mistakes paralyze us.
Right. It's all about finding that balance between accuracy and fluency.
And remember, making mistakes is a sign that you're pushing yourself and trying new things, which is essential for growth. So embrace those mistakes, learn from them, and keep practicing.
Speaking of practice, let's talk about another important strategy for developing fluency: immersion.
Ah, yes. The power of surrounding yourself with the language that you're learning.
It's like creating a mini language learning environment in your own life. And it's one of the most effective ways to accelerate your progress and make the language feel more natural and familiar.
Now, when we talk about immersion, we're not necessarily talking about moving to a country where the language is spoken, although that's certainly an option if it's available to you. But there are plenty of ways to create an immersive experience right where you are.
So even if we can't hop on a plane to England or America, we can still create an English-speaking world around us.
Exactly. You can listen to music, you can listen to podcasts in English, you can watch movies and TV shows with the subtitles, you can read books and articles, you can even change the language settings on your phone and your computer to English. The key is to surround yourself with the language as much as possible and make it a part of your daily routine.
I love that. So it's about weaving English into the fabric of your life rather than treating it like a separate subject that you only study for a few hours a week.
Precisely. And one of the biggest benefits of immersion is that it exposes you to a much wider variety of vocabulary and grammar structures than you might come across in a textbook or a classroom setting.
You'll encounter idioms, slang, and just colloquialisms that make the language come alive.
Exactly. And you'll start to pick up on the nuances of the language. Things like different accents, regional variations, even humor.
Another benefit of immersion is that it helps you develop your listening comprehension skills. When you're constantly exposed to the language, you'll start to tune in to the sounds and the rhythms, and you'll gradually become more comfortable understanding native speakers.
It's like training your ear to decode the language, which is essential for effective communication.
So how can we create an immersive environment for ourselves if we don't live in a country where English is spoken?
Well, there are tons of resources available both online and offline. You can find language learning apps, websites, podcasts. You can join online communities and forums where people are speaking English. You can even connect with native speakers through language exchange programs like we talked about earlier.
It sounds like the possibilities are endless.
They are. The key is to be proactive and to seek out those opportunities to immerse yourself in the language and to make it a part of your daily life.
That makes sense. Now, one of the most challenging aspects of immersion can be staying motivated, especially when you're first starting out and you're feeling overwhelmed by all the new information. Do you have any tips for staying motivated and avoiding burnout?
Absolutely. It's important to set realistic goals for yourself and to celebrate your progress along the way. Remember, immersion is a marathon, not a sprint. It takes time and effort to develop fluency, but with persistence and dedication, you can achieve your language learning goals.
That's encouraging to hear. And the rewards are well worth it, right?
Absolutely. Being able to communicate in another language opens up a whole new world of opportunities. It allows you to connect with people from different cultures. You can experience new things. You can expand your horizons in countless ways. It can even boost your cognitive function and your career prospects.
Now, those are some serious benefits. So if you're feeling discouraged, just remember why you started learning English in the first place. Keep
Yeah.
your eyes on the prize and just remind yourself of all the amazing things that fluency can bring.
Exactly. And remember that immersion is a journey, not a destination. Enjoy the process of discovering new things, making mistakes, and gradually becoming more comfortable with the language.
I love that perspective. It's all about embracing the ups and downs of the language learning journey and remembering that every step you take is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely. Now, before we move on to our final topic for today, we'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yes, we're curious. Have any of you tried immersion as a language learning strategy?
What tips do you have for creating an immersive environment and staying motivated?
Share your experiences and your insights in the comments below.
It's inspiring to see people embracing the challenge and having fun learning.
Yeah.
Speaking of having fun, let's circle back to some of those memory techniques we were discussing earlier.
Okay.
You know those little tricks that can help make those new words stick in our brains like glue? Because let's be honest, sometimes learning new vocabulary can feel like trying to herd cats.
Oh, that's a great analogy. They just scatter in all directions.
Exactly. But with the right strategies, we can kind of tame those wild words and make them our loyal companions.
I like that. So one of those strategies, as we talked about earlier, is that power of association.
Ah, yes, the art of connecting a new word to something familiar, something meaningful, something that will help us retrieve it from the depths of our memories.
Right.
And one of the most powerful forms of association is visual association.
Uh-huh.
It appears that our brains are wired for visual processing. We're much better at remembering images than abstract concepts.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If I say the word beach, what comes to mind?
Immediately I picture golden sand, sparkling turquoise water, and the sound of waves crashing on the shore.
Exactly. And that's the power of visual association.
Yeah.
By connecting that new word to that vivid image, we're creating a much stronger memory trace.
I see.
And the more senses we can engage in that image, the more memorable it will be. So it's not just about seeing that image in our mind's eye. It's about feeling the warmth of the sun on our skin, hearing the laughter of children playing in the sand, smelling the salty air.
And maybe tasting a delicious ice cream cone.
Exactly. The more vivid and multisensory the experience, the better.
Okay, so how can we apply this to learning new English words?
Well, let's say you're trying to learn the word exquisite.
Which means extremely beautiful and delicate.
Right. You could simply just memorize that definition.
But that's not very engaging, is it?
No, it's not.
So instead, we could try to create a visual association.
Exactly. So you might picture an exquisite piece of jewelry. You know, a sparkling diamond necklace, perhaps.
Okay.
Or a delicate butterfly with iridescent wings. And you could imagine yourself holding that necklace, feeling its weight in your hand, admiring its intricate design.
Or you could picture yourself watching that butterfly kind of flutter by marveling at its graceful movements and its vibrant colors.
Yeah. The more vivid and detailed the image, the more likely you are to remember the word exquisite.
And the more fun you have in the process.
Now, visual associations don't have to be realistic. In fact, sometimes the sillier or more outrageous the image, the better.
Okay.
Let's say you're trying to learn the word miniature.
Which means very small.
Right. You could picture a miniature elephant balancing on the tip of your finger,
Okay.
or a tiny house that you could fit in your pocket.
I like that.
And you could imagine yourself interacting with these miniature objects. Maybe you're giving that miniature elephant a peanut.
Yeah.
Or you're opening the door to that tiny house and stepping inside. Again, the more creative and engaging the image, the more memorable it'll be.
So we're more likely to remember the word miniature.
Yeah.
Now, it's not just static images that we can use to create visual associations, right?
Right.
We can also use actions and even sounds.
Absolutely. Let's say you're trying to learn the word whisper.
Which means to speak very quietly.
You could cup your hand around your mouth and practice whispering the word. Or you could imagine yourself telling a secret to a friend, whispering in their ear. And you could even add a sound effect in there, like the rustling of leaves or the gentle hum of a fan.
Yeah.
Exactly. By engaging multiple senses, you're creating a richer and more memorable learning experience.
So speaking of engaging multiple senses, let's talk about the role of entertainment in language learning.
Ah, yes, one of the most enjoyable and effective ways to acquire new vocabulary.
I've always been a firm believer in the power of movies and TV shows and music for language learning.
And for good reason. It appears that when we're entertained, our brains are more receptive to new information.
Yeah, it's like we're sneaking in that learning while having fun.
Precisely. And the great thing about entertainment is it exposes us to language in a natural and authentic context.
So instead of just memorizing words in isolation, we're hearing how they're used in real-life conversations.
Exactly. And we're picking up on the nuances of the pronunciation, the intonation, even body language.
Yeah, it's like getting a crash course in the culture as well as the language.
Absolutely. And the best part is, there are so many different types of entertainment to choose from. You can watch movies and TV shows, listen to music, read books, play video games.
The possibilities are kind of endless.
They are. The key is to choose something that you enjoy and that's appropriate for your level.
Right. So if you're a beginner, you might start with children's shows or songs with simple lyrics.
Right. And as your skills progress, you can gradually challenge yourself with more complex material.
And don't forget about the power of subtitles.
Yeah,
They can be a huge help when you're first starting out.
absolutely. They allow you to follow along with the dialogue and identify new words and phrases.
And as your listening skills improve, you can try watching without subtitles.
Exactly. It's all about finding that balance between challenge and enjoyment.
Speaking of finding the right balance, let's talk about another really important aspect of language learning: repetition.
Ah, yes, the cornerstone of any successful learning endeavor.
They say practice makes perfect, and that's certainly true when it comes to language acquisition.
It appears that our brains need repeated exposure to new information in order to commit it to long-term memory.
Okay.
So you can't just hear a word once and expect to remember it forever. We need to see it, hear it, say it, and use it multiple times before it becomes truly ingrained.
And the good news is there are tons of fun and creative ways to incorporate repetition into our language learning routine.
Absolutely. One classic technique is using flashcards. You can create your own or use one of the many digital flashcard apps that are available.
I love flashcard apps. They make it so easy to just review vocabulary on the go.
Yeah, and you can customize them to focus on the specific words and phrases that you're working on.
That's a great point. Another great strategy is to try to incorporate new words into your daily conversations.
Yeah, even if it feels a little awkward at first, the more you use those words, the more natural they'll become.
Right, and don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Right.
That's all part of the learning process.
Absolutely. In fact, making mistakes can actually help us learn better.
Really, how so?
Well, when we make a mistake and then we get corrected, it creates a stronger memory trace.
Yeah, it's like our brain is saying, okay, I messed up there. Let's make sure I don't do that again.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that repetition doesn't have to be boring. We can make it fun by incorporating game songs and other engaging activities.
Yeah, I love that idea. It's all about finding ways to make the learning process enjoyable and sustainable.
Precisely. Speaking of sustainability, let's talk about another important aspect of language learning: setting realistic goals.
Yeah.
Ah, yes. The key to staying motivated and avoiding burnout. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you're first starting out, especially if you're learning a language that's very different from your native tongue.
Right.
So it's important to break down your learning into smaller, more manageable chunks. Instead of trying to learn 1,000 words a week, focus on learning 5 or 10 words a day.
Right. And celebrate those small victories along the way.
Yeah.
It's all about progress, not perfection.
Absolutely. And it's also important to be patient with yourself. Language learning is a journey, not a race.
Yeah.
It takes time and effort, and there will be ups and downs along the way,
Oh.
but the rewards are well worth it. Being able to communicate in another language opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
Right. It allows you to connect with people from different cultures, experience new things, expand your horizons.
And it can even boost your cognitive function and your career prospects.
Those are some serious benefits. So if
Yeah.
you're feeling discouraged, just remember why you started learning in the first place. Keep your eyes on the prize. That ability to communicate in another language is a gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. So let's recap some of the key takeaways from today.
Okay.
We talked about the power of association, using visuals, the role of entertainment, the importance of repetition and setting realistic goals.
Yeah,
We also touched on being patient with yourself, enjoying the process, and celebrating your progress along the way.
excellent advice. I
Yeah.
feel like we covered a lot of ground today.
We have. But before we move on to the next topic, I'd love to hear from our listeners.
Yes, we want to know what strategies have worked best for you in your language learning journey.
Share your tips and experiences in the comments below. We can all learn from each other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't wait to hear all about those strategies. And speaking of strategies, we've reached the final destination on our journey today, finding a language partner.
Ah, yes. That elusive creature who can help transform our hesitant English into a flowing stream of confident conversation.
I love it. Now, for those of you who might be new to this whole concept, let's break down what a language partner is and why they can be so valuable.
Okay.
So simply put, a language partner is someone who speaks the language that you're trying to learn and is willing to practice with you.
Right.
So it could be a native English speaker or someone who is already fluent in the language.
Exactly. And what's great is they provide that opportunity for real-life conversation practice, which is something that can be missing from those more traditional language learning methods.
Because let's be honest,
Yeah,
textbooks and language apps can only take you so far.
that's true.
They can teach you the grammar and vocabulary, but they can't really replicate the spontaneity and the unpredictability of a real conversation.
Right.
And that's where a language partner can really come in.
Exactly. They can help you bridge that gap between knowing the language and actually using it. They can push you out of your comfort zone and encourage you to take risks with your English.
Yeah, I like that.
Most importantly, they can provide you with valuable feedback and support along the way.
So it's like having a personalized language coach who's also a friend.
Exactly. And the best part is that language exchange is a two-way street.
Right.
So while you're practicing your English, you can help your partner practice their native language.
It's a win-win situation. Now, I know finding a language partner can seem daunting, especially if you don't even know where to start.
But fear not. There are more resources than ever available before.
Oh, that's good. Like what, for example?
Well, one of the easiest ways to connect with language partners is through language exchange websites and apps. There are so many great ones out there. Some of the most popular include HelloTalk Tandem and italki.
Okay.
These platforms allow you to create a profile. You can specify your language learning goals, and you can connect with other learners from all over the world.
So you can filter your search based on your native language, the language you're learning, your interests, even your location.
Exactly. So you can find someone who's not only learning English, but who's also interested in learning your native language.
Right.
And many of these platforms offer built-in messaging systems and video chat features, so you can practice your English, both written and spoken.
I like it.
And you can connect with language partners from all over the globe.
Oh, wow. Now, if you prefer to meet your language partner face-to-face, there are options for that as well.
Yeah, lots of cities and towns have language exchange groups or meetups.
You can often find these groups through local libraries or community centers or even universities.
Right, and some language schools even offer language exchange programs as part of their curriculum.
Now, once you've found a potential language partner, how do you know if they're a good fit for you?
That's a great question. Oh, it's important to find someone who's at a similar language level, who shares your interests, and who's committed to regular practice.
So it's kind of like dating, but for language learning.
Exactly. You want to find someone who you connect with and you can see yourself having those enjoyable and productive conversations with.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
So once you've found that special language partner, how do you make the most of those language exchange sessions?
Well, consistency is key. It's important to schedule those regular practice sessions and stick to them as much as possible. So even if it's just 30 minutes once a week, having that regular interaction can make a huge difference.
Right. And is it helpful to have some structure to those practice sessions?
Yeah, it can be, especially when you're first starting out. You might decide to spend half the time speaking English and then half the time speaking in your partner's native language.
I see.
That way you both have that equal opportunity to practice and learn.
Right.
Until next time, happy learning.
Bye, everyone.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners like you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new episode, and by liking the video, you're letting us know you want more helpful content. Thank you for your support. It means so much to us.